Okay, thank you, Taylor. So my name is Bill Keeton. I'm a Gunn Fellow, and I'm a professor of forest ecology in the Rubenstein School. Chuck Kirshner and I have one simple message for you today, which is that forest carbon projects can work in Vermont. And in so doing, we can help fight climate change while generating revenue that will help support open space conservation and working forests and all the co-benefits those things provide. So forest carbon projects are happening, and they're coming online across the country. The price point is particularly exciting under the growing California compliance market. And forest carbon projects anywhere in the country can participate in this market system. Eligible forests include private lands, tribal lands, state forests, municipal forests, just not federal forests. But think of the incredible potential for town forests, state forests, and a huge variety of ownerships right here in Vermont. The problem has been that there's been quite a bit of skepticism in New England about these markets for some time now. People are concerned about market price fluctuations. They're concerned about the very burdensome transaction costs. There's market uncertainty in terms of how the California market will develop. And there are really other important questions like economies of scale relating to property sizes and that sort of thing. So with this study, we wanted to take a really close look at all those variables and how they interact in determining the financial viability of forest carbon projects here in the Northeast. We used forest carbon inventory data from 25 properties across the Northeast. These encompass a range of ownerships, property sizes, site conditions, and management approaches. The data were fed into the forest vegetation simulator and projected over 100 years, which is the time frame required by the California market. And then we simulated the properties under a variety of different silvicultural regimes shown here. And in so doing, we could project the carbon offsets that these properties would develop and generate. Now, a really important concept here is something called common practice, which is a baseline that a project has to compare itself against. And this is basically the average carbon stocking in a physiographic province for a given forest type and a given site class. And this is a really important benchmark because your position relative to this baseline has a huge effect on whether or not a project is a money winner or a money loser, as you're going to see a little bit later on. We modeled a full array of transaction costs covering project development, verification, and long-term monitoring. These were real-world data from project developers. And our results were simply amazing. We produced a whole variety of tools that will help landowners determine when and where carbon projects will work in New England. This is just one example. It's a classification and regression tree using mean internal rate of return, which is basically a measure of your return on investment, as a dependent variable down there at the bottom. And what this does is it ranks the relative predictive strength of the variables that we looked at against that dependent variable. And what we see is that by far and away, the strongest predictor of return on investment is the carbon stocking. So properties that are well above common practice have the greatest financial returns. But a lot of other variables were also important, so property size, management regime, and other things. So for instance, larger properties that were well stocked had the greatest returns. Smaller properties that were poorly stocked had the lowest returns. We can also look at this in terms of cash flows. And so here we have scenarios that trade off those different variables that we looked at. And what we see is that some of these scenarios are clearly money losers. They're just not going to work. But for others, there's really a potential here to generate some pretty significant returns. But what we see over and over again is that that original starting place in terms of carbon stocking has a huge effect. And that's because you generate a huge pulse of carbon credits right off the bat if you're above carbon or above the common practice. So we know that carbon projects will work in Vermont. They're not going to work for everybody, though. But for some they will, and where carbon is compatible with long-term conservation and stewardship objectives, it's going to fit well. There's really an important role here, though, for state policies that can encourage the development of these projects. The bus is arriving soon, folks. Are we going to get on board? Thanks very much.